directed by Paul Gagny from 2007. We are talking Blood Predator. And this is one of those movies that I expect one day to see on a boutique label like Vinegar Syndrome, and then we'll get people buying them and saying, oh, I didn't like the film very much, but the box was quite nice. It's one of those type of movies, one of these kind of throwaway, cheapy horror movies, but somehow gets like some like nice edition at some point. Okay, what's the story, you might be asking? That cover does look cool. Well, it focuses on a group of tourists who are on a small private plane hoping to go skiing. And they're flying over this kind of icy part of America. And their plane goes down, and they find what they think is solace in this solitary building, this kind of shack which is out in the middle of nowhere. But little do they know this shack has already been claimed by some type of aliens who have come down at some point, and they're kind of like these insect-like aliens, and they ain't too friendly. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. Let's talk about the good stuff. Now, this is a very, very low budget movie, and I would suggest it kind of feels a little bit like a Trober movie in some ways. It's positives. Okay. Now, I kind of actually quite like the design of the aliens. I'm going to say this. That might come as a shock, as I'm going to kind of almost contradict myself in a little bit. But I actually quite like the fact that they kind of look like ants. They look like giant ants. So they do look very bug-like. They're not humanoid. It's not a guy in a costume. And the effects are both practical and obviously early CGI. This is a 2007 movie. The practical effects, yeah, they kind of look cheap. Let's not sugarcoat it here. It's a B movie. I'm used to watching B movies. But I still kind of quite like some of the practical VFX here. The kind of like this quite elaborate bug-like design, I actually thought was quite interesting. Now, we see that they've crash-landed in a spaceship at the beginning of the movie, very much like the opening of Predator. But they seem like kind of just animals, so it's a little bit of a contradiction, but whatever. This is the positives. But I quite liked the... I did quite like the kind of the practical design of these kind of like these ants-like kind of creatures in that respect. I would also say there is some sort of reasonable, fun, practical gore here. We get a few kind of like, you know, people's heads and guts all over the place and things like that. I mean, it's not realistic. This isn't kind of like anything like Terrifier or anything like that, but it's a kind of fun, practical kind of like sloppy effects that you'll see sometimes in the movie. It's got lots of boobs in it. If you like boobs, you may want to check it out. Our kind of group of tourists, I think it's got 4 females and 3 guys, I think. And I think they pretty much all have a sex scene at some point. So there's lots of kind of boobs here and lots of busty women. So there's, you know, it's kind of quite schlocky in that regards, which gives it this kind of like almost sort of 80s vibe to it to a degree. You know, so you know, those of you who like a bit of TNA, you'll like this one, I suspect, in regards to those scenes specifically. Overall, it's kind of a silly B movie in many respects. There's plenty of things that don't really make sense. The characters are a little bit sort of comedic and in respect that they are over the top and not kind of realistic characters in some ways. So you have that, again, that Troma-esque feel to it where the characters don't seem quite like real humans. They seem like a you know, hyper-realised versions of stereotypes and things like this. We've got the kind of the snooty rich guy, the kind of the bro dude, the kind of like the guy who thinks he's great at everything but actually isn't, and things. The male characters are, I think, are a little bit more individual. The female characters tend to be a little bit more homogenous in a way, yeah, there are at least some quite memorable characters, I suppose. But let's talk about the negatives here. Okay, so probably the biggest negative, first of all, is that this is not a long movie. It's just under an hour and a half. But we really don't get anything of note happening on screen in regards to horror elements until over an hour into the movie. The bulk of this running time is these people surviving in a shack. There is one person that gets killed off screen, but they put it down to it being a bear. So that's kind of it. But we don't really get any creature attacks until, you know, over an hour into this movie. And it's not a long film, as I say. So what is the runtime up until that point? It's over the top characters talking in this one shack, or the brief scene of them on the plane. It doesn't really kind of make for thrilling entertainment, it has to be said. The acting, it's not brilliant. It's very, very B-movie. You know, it's kind of like, as I say, Troma-like, or early kind of sci-fi channel-like acting. The characters are very broad. They go so far in actual fact. The characters, as I said, don't really seem like real humans. Especially the guys, they might be more memorable, but they seem like just too over the top to be counted as realistic kind of depictions of a human being. As I said, the women are a little bit more subdued. The characters aren't quite as strong, perhaps, but maybe they feel a little bit more kind of grounded to a degree. The movie doesn't really make any sense. You know, as I said, these creatures we see at the beginning, they appear to come down in some type of spacecraft, but when we see them, they just appear to be like feral animals, incapable of having a spacecraft. Where is the spacecraft? Don't know. You know, how did NASA not see it? Don't know. Whatever. But you know, it is what it is. You know, and at the end of the movie, mild spoiler here, I suppose, but the guys get killed off first, leaving the women just to kind of to try and deal with it. And instead of just getting out of there, they decide to try and fight the creatures. I mean, they have the excuse that there's a snowstorm, but it doesn't appear to be a problem like later on in the movie. Why not just get out? Why do they feel they have to go and face these creatures? It doesn't make any sense. You know, obviously for a film, we want to have that kind of confrontation, but narratively, it doesn't really make any sense. They could have just got out. They could have just left, because that's what happens at the end. Doesn't really make any sense, as I say. And that's just an example of some of the kind of the silly kind of logic that kind of inhibits this movie. Let's talk about the creatures again. Now, I'm a B-movie fan. I kind of appreciate the fact that things are done on a low budget, and I kind of quite enjoyed the practical effects. But there's also CGI effects, and it's a 2007 movie. We've got to think of the budget, and we've got to think of the time here. They look terrible. They look terrible. Imagine the earliest kind of incantations of low budget CGI, and you know, this is a good example of it. Even though obviously CGI was used a good 10 years before this, but it's just terrible, very cheap CGI, and I think undoes some of what is, you know, the practical effects aren't great, and yeah, they're hokey and cheesy, but you can kind of still enjoy it, I think, on a B-movie level. But when we see the CGI, and they have even scenes where we have practical and CGI creatures on screen at the same time, and you know, it looks just silly, and then the creatures appear to change size, just like wherever the shot is. They just seem to be superimposed on whatever background and stuff like that. It looks terrible. Yeah, so it's a pretty forgettable movie overall. One of these films which, you know, might have some cool cover art, but when the actual comes down to it, it's a pretty unmemorable and forgettable, and quite honestly, quite avoidable movie. You're not really missing much by missing this. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. I appreciate some of the kind of the silly, cheesy effects, certainly on the practical side, but the pacing is terrible. The characters, I think, you know, not right, and yeah, it's just not a good movie at the end of the day. 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I look forward to seeing you next time.